The satin of the wedding dress felt like a shroud. It whispered against her skin with every forced, measured breath, a sound like falling leaves, or perhaps like the slow closing of a tomb. Ilara stood before the gilded mirror in a room that smelled of rosewater and dread, watching as a stranger's hands, manicured, efficient, cold, pinned white orchids into the dark waves of her hair. The reflection they created was a masterpiece of expensive misery. The gown, a confection of ivory lace and seed pearls, was perfection itself. Marcus had seen to that. 6 fittings, 6 sessions where he stood like a sculptor surveying a block of marble, directing the seamstresses to take it in here, let it out there, until the dress didn't just fit her body, it imprisoned her spirit. It was a gilded cage, and today was the day the lock would click shut forever. Through the mirror's cruel glass, she saw him appear in the doorway, Marcus, her fiancé, the man who had purchased her future from her father in exchange for clearing a mountain of gambling debts. He leaned against the frame, not looking at her face, but assessing her. His gaze traveled over the dress like an appraiser judging a newly acquired painting. "Acceptable," he said, his voice as smooth and polished as the marble floors. "You look valuable. Not beautiful, not happy, valuable." The word landed in the quiet room with the finality of a judge's gavel. She was another asset in his portfolio, placed between the imported vintage wines and the rare jade sculptures, a living ornament for his dinner parties, a talented pianist to entertain his associates, a well-bred wife to cement his social standing. Her dreams, her music, the life she had imagined for herself, all of it was irrelevant noise to be silenced. Her hands, hidden in the ridiculous folds of lace in her lap, trembled. Her fingertips, calloused from 15 years of piano practice since she was a child of 7, caught on the delicate fabric. Each callus was a tiny monument to a rebellion her father had never understood. Music was a hobby, he had insisted, not a future, a pleasant diversion for a lady, not a profession. But those calluses were her truth, and now they felt like the only real part of her left. "The ceremony begins in precisely 57 minutes. My most important associates have arrived. Do not embarrass me." He didn't wait for a response. He never did. His footsteps echoed down the cavernous marble hallway of his palatial estate, fading into a silence that felt heavier than before. Ilara turned her gaze to the window. Below, in the sprawling, manicured garden, a nightmare of pastel colors was unfolding. Hundreds of guests, business rivals, social climbers, distant relatives, mingled like elegant birds, sipping champagne and waiting for the main event, the transfer of ownership. Her stomach twisted. She wasn't getting married. She was being sold, and this was the auction floor. The young attendant fussing with her veil met her eyes in the mirror. The girl couldn't be more than 17, but her eyes held a weary wisdom that didn't belong in such a young face. She had seen this before, Ilara realized, the reluctant bride in this very room, in this very dress. The girl's fingers hesitated on a final pin. She leaned in, her voice a breath, so faint it was almost lost in the rustle of tulle. "Miss," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the door, "there's a servant's stair. At the end of the hall, past the portrait of the old master, it goes down through the kitchens, straight out to the delivery alley." Ilara's heart, which had been beating a slow, doomed rhythm, gave a frantic, hopeful lurch. "Why are you telling me this?" The attendant's gaze was direct, filled with a painful empathy. "Because you keep humming it, that sad old song. My mother used to hum it when she was tired from working 3 jobs. No one who carries a song like that in their heart should be standing where you are today." The lullaby. Ilara hadn't even realized she was doing it. It was her secret melody, the one her grandmother had taught her when she was small, to chase away nightmares. Her grandmother had called it a song for the lonely soul, its words in a language so ancient even she didn't fully understand them. A wild, terrifying hope ignited in her chest, burning away the numbness. It was madness. It was suicide. Marcus would hunt her to the ends of the earth. Her father would disown her completely. She would have nothing, no money, no home, no name. But she would have her hands and her song, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to breathe air that wasn't perfumed with her own despair. The decision crystallized in an instant. She gave the attendant the bare nod, a communication of profound gratitude that words could never convey. 10 minutes later, chaos was a symphony she composed with her own 2 feet. She was running. The stolen wedding dress, a grotesque parody of freedom, billowed around her, its hem snagging on garbage bins and catching on rough cobblestones in the back alley behind Marcus's estate. She had kicked off the agonizing satin heels, and the cold, gritty pavement bit into her bare feet. Each sharp stone, each piece of broken glass was a note in her song of escape. She didn't feel the pain. She was fueled by pure, undiluted adrenaline. Behind her, muffled by the high walls, she heard the first discordant notes of discovery. A raised voice, a shout, the distant building crescendo of Marcus's fury. The garden full of waiting guests would be buzzing with the scandal now. The thought almost made her laugh, a hysterical, gasping sound lost in the wind of her flight. She burst out of the alley and into the bustling market district, a sudden splash of white satin in a sea of drab wool and leather. Heads turned, people stared. She was a spectacle, a runaway ghost in a wedding gown. She didn't care. She wove through carts laden with vegetables, ducked under awnings, her breath sobbing in her lungs. A shout closer this time. That way, in the white. Her guards. Panic, cold and sharp, injected itself into her veins. She sprinted down a narrower street, the walls pressing in. She could hear the pound of boots gaining. Desperation narrowed her world to the next corner, the next shadow. She took a turn too fast, her bare feet sliding on something wet. The world tilted. Instead of open road, a massive black shape loomed before her, a limousine, long and sleek as a panther, idling at the curb. There was no time to stop. With a cry that was half terror, half exhaustion, she slammed shoulder first into the vehicle's polished door. The impact jarred her bones, and she crumpled sideways, the world dissolving into a blur of dark metal and sky. But she never hit the ground. The car door swung open silently from within, and strong, impossibly steady hands caught her. They pulled her from the chaotic symphony of the street into a pocket of sudden, profound silence. The door thudded shut behind her, muffling the sounds of pursuit into a distant, irrelevant echo. Ilara found herself dumped unceremoniously onto leather seats softer than any cloud, facing the interior's dim, opulent gloom. And the man sitting across from her made her forget how to breathe. He was beautiful, but not in a way that brought comfort. His was the beauty of a glacier, ancient, severe, and radiating a calm so absolute it felt dangerous. Dark hair fell across a forehead that seemed carved from pale stone. His eyes, the color of a stormy twilight, held a depth that spoke not of years, but of centuries. He wore a suit of simple, exquisite black, and he regarded her not with shock or anger, but with a detached, fascinated curiosity, as if a rare and disheveled bird had just flown through his window. This was not a man. Every primal instinct in Ilara's human soul screamed the truth. This was a predator wearing a civilized skin, a vampire. The air around him hummed with a silent, potent energy, the energy of a mortal power held in perfect, effortless check. "Well," he said. His voice was low, a vibration that seemed to resonate in the very marrow of her bones, like distant thunder felt through stone. "Tell me," he murmured, those stormy cloud eyes missing nothing, "are you running from something or towards something?" She finally found her voice, a ragged scrape in her dry throat. "From," she managed, "definitely from." A ghost of something, not a smile, but an acknowledgement touched his lips. "Intriguing. Most souls in flight are propelled by hope, the promise of safety, of freedom, of love. But your energy is pure negation. You are a verb with only an object of escape. There is no destination in your heart, only the desperate need to not be where you were." He saw right through her, through the dress, the dirt, the panic, to the hollow, terrified core of her. It was terrifying. It was also, perversely, the first moment of being truly seen in years. Through the limousine's heavily tinted window, she saw them. Marcus's guards, two brutish men, paused at the mouth of the street, scanning the crowd. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. She shrank back into the deep leather, trying to make herself disappear. The vampire followed her gaze. He saw the searching men, saw her terror crystallize. His ancient eyes flickered with a decision made in a fraction of a second. "Driver," he said calmly, pressing a button on the armrest, "take the scenic route home. It appears we have acquired a guest." The limousine purred to life and pulled away from the curb with a smooth, powerful surge, gliding past the searching guards as if they were mere statues. Alara stared at the man, her mind struggling to process this impossible pivot. "You're helping me?" He settled back, the picture of relaxed elegance. "Perhaps. Or perhaps I am a monster with a fondness for collecting interesting curiosities. The day is yet young." The tone was dry, almost playful, but the intensity in his eyes belied the casual words. A hysterical laugh bubbled in Ilara's chest. She choked it back. "Who are you?" This time, the ghost of a smile was more pronounced. "I am Valerius, king of the Northern Vampire Court. And you are, unless I am mistaken, the woman who just made her own wedding the season's most talked about social event without having the decency to actually attend it." King. A vampire king. The absurdity of it all finally broke the dam. The laugh escaped, brittle and sharp, edged with tears. "I'm glad someone finds this amusing." King Valerius's expression softened, a minute thawing of his glacial composure. "You were humming when you collided with my vehicle. A lullaby. An ancient one. I haven't heard its melody in a very long time. Where did you learn it?" The question was so unexpected it cut through her hysterics. "My grandmother. She taught it to me when I was small. She said it was a song for forgotten things, a melody to soothe a restless heart. She never said where she learned it." Valerius went preternaturally still. The relaxed elegance vanished, replaced by a focus so absolute it was like being caught in a beam of cold light. "Sing it," he said, and his voice had changed. The casual amusement was gone, replaced by something raw, something that sounded almost like hunger, but not for blood, for the notes themselves. "Please." It wasn't a command, it was a plea from a being who never pleaded. Throat raw from running, voice shaky with fear and exhaustion, Ilara complied. She closed her eyes, shutting out the opulent car, the watching king, the terror of the last hour, and found the familiar, soothing pattern in her mind. She sang softly, the words of the ancient tongue flowing from her lips, telling their story of moonlit paths and starlit memories, and watchful, loving eyes that never truly fade. As she sang, Valerius closed his eyes. His hands, which had been resting loosely on his knees, curled slowly into fists, the knuckles standing out white against his pale skin. He was listening not just with his ears, but with his entire being, a centuries-old vampire caught in the web of a simple human melody. When the last note faded into the limousine's quiet hum, the silence was a physical presence, thick and charged. Valerius opened his eyes. The storm in them had been replaced by a profound, wounded awe. "That song," he said, his voice rough with an emotion he could barely contain. "My late queen, Seraphina, she sang it every night to our daughter, Lyra. She died 3 years ago, and from the night of her mother's funeral, my daughter has not spoken, not a single word. She has retreated into a silence so deep, not even I can reach her." Ilara's heart clenched. The grief in his voice was a living thing, ancient and terrible. "I'm so sorry." He continued, his gaze locked on her as if she held the moon in her hands. "I have searched. I have employed historians, hired musicians from across the continents, consulted with scholars of dead languages. No one knew it. No one remembered. It was as if the song died with my wife. And then you fall into my car humming it as if it were a nursery rhyme." The pieces clicked into place with a dread that was different from her fear of Marcus. This was a deeper, more cosmic terror. "I teach piano," she said softly, almost to herself. "I work with children, sometimes the ones who have lost too much too soon. Music can sometimes find a crack in the armor that words cannot." Valerius leaned forward, the space between them crackling with his intensity. "I have a proposition, Ilara. You need sanctuary, protection from the man you fled, from the life that sought to cage you. I can provide that, a fortress no human can breach. In return, I need someone who might be able to reach my daughter, someone who understands that silence is not emptiness, but a language all its own, someone who carries that specific, impossible song." It was too much, an exchange of one cage for another, however gilded. "You want me to be a magical nanny?" "He want you to try," he said, and the king was gone again, replaced by a desperate father. "Meet her. See if your music, that song, can do what 3 years of doctors and mind healers and my own feudal love could not. If you can help her even a little, I will ensure you never have to fear your past again. You will have a home, a purpose, and my absolute protection. If you say no," he gestured to the door, "my driver will take you anywhere you wish to go. I will provide funds, papers, a new identity, no obligation. The choice is yours." He meant it. She could hear the absolute sincerity in his voice, see it in the unblinking honesty of his ancient eyes. He wasn't trapping her, he was bargaining, her freedom for a sliver of his hope. Ilara thought of Marcus's calculating gaze, her father's indifferent betrayal. She thought of a life forever running, looking over her shoulder. Then she thought of a little girl, a vampire princess, locked in a tomb of silence built from grief. She thought of the lullaby, her grandmother's legacy, and the strange, hungry way this king had listened to it. She was a runaway bride in a stolen dress, sitting in a vampire king's limousine, offered a choice between two different kinds of unknown. She took a breath that felt like her first in years. "I'll try," she whispered. "I can't promise anything. Grief is a maze, but I'll try." The relief that washed over Valerius's face was so profound, it transformed him. For a moment, he looked almost human. "That," he said, his voice thick, "is all I ask." The limousine sped on, carrying her away from the city, from her old life, into the gathering dusk and towards the mountains, towards a fortress called the Spire, a kingdom of night, and a sleeping princess, whose silence held a secret far darker than anyone knew. And as the city lights faded behind them, Ilara, for the first time, noticed the landscape beyond the window was beginning to wither. Trees stood skeletal against the twilight, their leaves gone despite it being early autumn. The fields were patchy and gray. A deep, unnatural chill seemed to seep from the very earth. But King Valerius, staring ahead, did not seem to see it. His mind was on the song, and the fragile hope now sleeping exhaustedly across from him, still wearing the tattered remains of a wedding dress. The spire was not a castle. It was a mountain that had been convinced to become architecture. It speared up from the spine of the world, black stone fused with glittering obsidian-like glass, catching the last bloody rays of the sunset and fracturing them into 1,000 dark reflections. It didn't glow. It absorbed light, a monolithic silhouette against the bruised purple sky. As the limousine climbed the single, terrifying road carved into the cliff face, Ilara felt the very air change. It grew thinner, colder, and carried a strange metallic tang, like ozone after a storm, or the quiet before a scream. No guards stood at the massive rune-carved gates. They simply swung inward at their approach, moved by unseen forces. The courtyard within was a geometric masterpiece of shadow and pale stone, utterly silent but for the whisper of a bitter wind. No servants scurried, no banners fluttered. The silence here was not peaceful, it was watchful, heavy. Valerius helped her from the car, his hand cool and steadying. She stood on the flagstones, the borrowed cloak he'd offered wrapped tightly around her ruined dress, and felt infinitesimally small. "This way," he said, his voice hushed as if in a cathedral. "She prefers the conservatory at this hour." They moved through halls that were lessons in immensity. Vaulted ceilings vanished into gloom. Tapestries depicted scenes of breathtaking beauty and terrifying battles under unfamiliar constellations. But everywhere Ilara looked, she saw the same subtle blight she'd noticed on the land. A vase of flowers on a pedestal held blossoms that were crisp and brown at the edges, as if lightly scorched. A patch of intricate mosaic on the floor was dull, its colors leached away. The spire was dying from the inside out. The conservatory was a glass jewel box clinging to the mountain's sheer face. Instead of vibrant tropical plants, it housed a forest of gray. Ferns were brittle lace. Trees stood bare, their branches like clutching fingers against the glass. In the center of this grayscale garden, on a stone bench facing the abyss, sat a girl, Princess Lyra. She was maybe 10, dressed in a gray silk dress that seemed to blend with the gloom. Her hair, the color of winter ash, was neatly braided. She did not turn as they entered. She did not move at all. She was a statue, a perfect, heartbreaking sculpture of absence. "Lyra," Valerius said, his voice softening into a tone Ilara had not heard before, a father's tender, broken hope. "Sweetheart, we have a visitor." The girl gave no indication she had heard. Her gaze remained fixed on the distant, darkening peaks. Valerius's shoulders slumped, just a fraction. The mighty king deflated. He nodded to Ilara, a silent plea. Ilara's teacher instinct surfaced, pushing back her awe and fear. She knew this posture. It wasn't just grief, it was dissociation, a retreat so complete that the world outside had ceased to exist. She moved slowly, not towards the princess, but to the room's far side where a large, dusty harp stood, its strings gray with neglect. She didn't speak. Words were useless here. She sat, adjusted the cloak, and let her calloused fingers hover over the strings. She didn't play the lullaby, not yet. That felt too intimate, too powerful a weapon to use as an opener. Instead, she began to improvise. A simple, wandering melody in a minor key. It was music without a clear destination, echoing the lost feeling in the room, the emptiness in the garden, the hollow ache in a father's eyes. It was a musical question. "Are you there?" She played for 5 minutes, 10. The only sounds were the whisper of the harp and the mournful wind outside the glass. Lyra did not stir. Then Ilara let her fingers gently find the familiar pattern. The first few notes of the lullaby drifted into the still air, tender as a falling leaf. Lyra's head turned. Not much, just a slight shift, a few degrees, but it was a seismic event in the stillness of the room. Ilara's heart leapt, but she kept her expression calm, her eyes on the strings. She continued, weaving the ancient melody into her improvisation, making it a natural part of the soundscape. She sang the words softly, the alien syllables feeling both strange and intimately familiar on her tongue. From the corner of her eye, she saw Lyra's hands, which had been folded limply in her lap, twitch. The fingers curled inward. Valerius, standing frozen in the doorway, had stopped breathing. Ilara played the lullaby through once, then let it dissolve back into the aimless, searching music. She played until the twilight through the glass turned to full dark, and the room was lit only by the soft, phosphorescent glow of a few struggling fungi. Her fingers ached. Her voice was a rasp. Finally, she let the last note fade. The silence rushed back in, but it wasn't a different silence now. It was expectant. Lyra uncurled from the bench. She stood, movements stiff from long stillness, and walked across the gray stone floor. She stopped a few feet from the harp, close enough to see Ilara's fingers, but maintaining a careful distance. Her eyes, a startling silver gray like her father's, were fixed on the strings. Ilara smiled gently, still not looking directly at her. "It's a good instrument," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been lonely." Lyra's gaze flicked to her face, then back to the harp. After a long moment, she reached out one pale, small hand. Her index finger extended,
hesitated in the air, then plucked a single string. Twang! The note, deep and resonant, hung in the air, a solitary sound in the vast quiet. "That's a good note," Ilara said. "Low D. It feels like the mountain remembering something." Lyra plucked it again. Then, with a swift, almost furtive motion, she brushed two higher strings, creating a discordant jangle. She flinched back as if burned. "All notes are friends," Ilara said quickly, softly. "Even the ones that argue. Sometimes they have the most interesting conversations." She played the discord Lyra had made, then resolved it into a gentle chord. "See? They just needed an introduction." Lyra stared, her silver eyes wide. For the first time, Ilara saw not a vacant shell, but a mind working behind those eyes, a mind that was terrified and tragically brilliantly awake inside its prison. A smooth, cultured voice sliced through the moment. "Your Majesty, I had not realized we had guests." A man stood in the conservatory entrance. He was tall, elegantly dressed in shades of charcoal and midnight blue, with hair as black as the spire's stone and eyes that matched. His smile was flawless, but it didn't touch his eyes, which were as cold and assessing as a raven's. He bowed slightly to Valerius, but his gaze was on Ilara, sweeping over her borrowed cloak, her bare feet, her general dishevelment with icy curiosity. "Lord Corvus," Valerius said, and a layer of kingly formality settled over him like armor. "This is Ilara. She is here as a musical consultant for Lyra." "A consultant?" Corvus tasted the word. His eyes lingered on Ilara's hands. "How unconventional and human. My dear, you must be exhausted from your journey and somewhat underdressed for our climate." His tone was dripping with faux concern, every syllable a carefully placed needle. "Ilara will be staying with us," Valerius said, his voice leaving no room for debate. "See that appropriate quarters are prepared, in the east wing, near Lyra's rooms." Corvus's perfect mask didn't slip, but a frost seemed to settle around the air. "Of course, sire, though if I may, the stability of the spire is delicate. Introducing an unknown element, a human no less, into Lyra's routine could have unforeseen consequences. Her condition is tied to the kingdom's well-being in ways we do not fully understand." The warning was clear, veiled in loyalty. Ilara felt a fresh chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "The decision is made, Corvus," Valerius said, his tone final. He turned back to his daughter, his expression softening once more. Lyra had retreated during the exchange, her back to them, staring out at the black night again, but her shoulders were hunched, tense. Corvus bowed again, this time lower. "As you command." He turned to leave, but paused, his eyes finding Ilara's once more. "Welcome to the spire, Miss Ilara. Do tread lightly. Our foundations here are older than they appear, and not all of them are sound." He left, his footsteps silent on the stone. The encounter left a stain on the fragile hope of the moment. Valerius looked weary. "Come," he said to Ilara, "you need rest. Proper clothes. We will continue tomorrow." A servant, a young vampire woman with anxious eyes, led Ilara to the east wing. The rooms were beautiful, a sitting room with a fireplace of carved jet, a bedroom with a vast window overlooking the terrifying drop, and a bathing chamber with a sunken tub. Clothes had been laid out, simple, elegant terawals and tunics in dark blues and deep greens, all in her size. The vampire efficiency was again unnerving. As she bathed, washing the grime and terror of the day from her skin, she replayed the events. The lullaby's effect on the king, Lyra's tiny, monumental response, and Lord. The days at the spire settled into a fragile, watchful rhythm. Each morning, Ilara went to the gray conservatory. Sometimes Lyra was already there. Sometimes she would appear minutes after the music began, drawn like a moth to the candle flame of sound. She never spoke, but she listened. She watched Ilara's hands with an intensity that was almost frightening. Ilara didn't force the lullaby.
She wove it in sparingly, a familiar thread in a tapestry of other melodies. She taught Lyra's simple patterns on the harp, guiding her small, cold hands to pluck strings in sequence. The princess's touch was hesitant at first, then grew more assured. She began to anticipate chord changes, her head tilting when a note was wrong. It wasn't speech, but it was communication, a language of vibration and expectation. Valerius visited often, lingering in the doorway, a statue of guarded hope. He watched his daughter's tiny interactions with a hunger that was painful to see. He began to join them, not as a king, but as a student. He asked Ilara to teach him the basics of the harp, an act of such profound vulnerability it disarmed her completely. His immortal fingers, used to wielding swords and scepters, were clumsy on the strings. He hit wrong notes with a consistency that was almost impressive. The first time he created a particularly jarring discord, Lyra made a sound, a tiny, breathy puff of air that was almost a laugh. Valerius froze, his stormy eyes flying to his daughter's face. Lyra quickly looked away, her cheeks flushing the faintest shade of pink, but the moment hung in the air, shimmering and precious. "It seems I am the court jester," Valerius said dryly, a real smile touching his lips for the first time since Ilara had met him. "The most important role," Ilara replied, smiling back. "Everyone needs a reminder not to take themselves too seriously." It was during these lessons that Ilara saw the king, not the monarch. She saw Aldrich, the man he might have been before crown and catastrophe. He was a fast learner, fiercely intelligent, and possessed of a dry, subtle wit. He asked her about her life before, about teaching, about music. He listened with the focus that made her feel her experiences mattered. The gulf between runaway human and ancient vampire king began, slowly, to feel bridgeable. But the shadow of Lord Corvus was always present. He never interrupted the sessions, but Ilara would often sense him watching from the deeper shadows of the hall, a silent, disapproving silhouette. His presence was a drop of ink in clear water, spreading a chill. He controlled the household, the supplies, the communication with the outside. Valerius ruled, but Corvus administered, and he made it clear he considered Ilara an infection, a destabilizing variable in his careful, decaying equation. One afternoon, Valerius was called away to settle a dispute from an outlying district, another village reporting advancing gloom. Ilara and Lyra were alone in the conservatory, working on a simple duet. Lyra would play a three-note pattern, and Ilara would answer it with a harmonious phrase. It was a musical conversation, and Lyra was fully engaged, her silver eyes alight with concentration. The door opened, without a knock. Corvus entered, holding a sheaf of parchments. "My apologies for the intrusion, Princess, Miss Ilara. A matter requires the king's seal, and as his chancellor, I must access his study. It adjoins this room." He gestured to a nearly invisible door woven into the glass and stone wall. Ilara nodded, uneasy. Lyra had gone still, her small hands retreating into her lap. Corvus didn't go to the study immediately. He walked to the harp, running a long, pale finger along its frame. A beautiful instrument. It belonged to Queen Seraphina, you know. She had a gift for drawing life from inanimate things. His cold eyes settled on Ilara. A rare gift. One should be careful with such legacies. They can be misinterpreted. "I'm just teaching the princess music," Ilara said, keeping her voice level. "Of course you are, and it is charming to see her respond. But tell me, do you understand what you are teaching her? That lullaby you're so fond of, it is not just a song, it is a relic, a fragment of a power system that shattered ages ago, the celestial harmony." The name landed in the room like a stone. Lyra flinched. "My grandmother called it a comfort song," Ilara said, her heart beginning to pound.
Your grandmother, Corvus said, a knowing smile playing on his lips, was undoubtedly a keeper, a custodian of lost arts. The celestial harmony was music used to tune the world itself, to keep primordial forces in check. The lullaby is a seed of that music, and seeds in the right soil can grow into terrible, wonderful things. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a confidential whisper that felt like a spider crawling on her skin. The princess's silence is not merely grief, girl. It is a containment field. Her mother, in her dying act, used the last of her own life force to bind the wild magic that was consuming Lyra. She wrapped her daughter in a cocoon of silence to keep the storm inside from getting out. Every note of that lullaby doesn't just remind Lyra of her mother, it vibrates at the frequency of that cage. You are not calming a child, you are strumming the bars of a prison holding back a hurricane. Ilara's blood ran cold. She looked at Lyra, who was staring at her lap, trembling. The king, he didn't say. The king is a father drowning in hope. He sees a chance to hear his daughter's voice. He does not wish to see what that voice might unleash. I, however, must look at the larger picture. The gloom outside is the leakage from that prison. The magic is corrosive, yes, but it is also pure, raw power. Power that could be harnessed, controlled, if one had the correct conductor. His gaze was avaricious. The complete celestial score. Your lullaby is a page. I need the entire book. He turned and finally entered the king's study, leaving Ilara reeling. Her hands were icy. She looked at Lyra, seeing her not as a sad child, but as a vessel holding an ocean of destructive magic, a magic her own mother had died to contain. Was Valerius using her? Did he know the true danger and was gambling her life and his kingdom on a chance to save his child? Lyra lifted her head. Tears traced silent paths down her cheeks. For the first time, she reached out not for the harp, but for Ilara's hand. Her small, cold fingers gripped Ilara's with a surprising strength. Her lips moved, forming a single, silent word. Sorry. The door from the study opened again, and Valerius returned, his expression stormy from the bad news from the valley. He stopped, seeing Lyra holding Ilara's hand, seeing the tears. His anger evaporated into concern. Lyra, what's wrong? Lyra dropped Ilara's hand as if scalded and turned back to the window, shutting them out once more. Valerius's questioning, troubled gaze found Ilara's. She opened her mouth to tell him what Corvus had said, to demand the truth, but the words died in her throat. The look in his eyes was pure, unguarded fear, not of her, but for his daughter. If Corvus's version was true, telling Valerius might shatter the fragile progress they'd made. It might make him send her away. And if there was even a chance she could help Lyra without causing disaster, she had to try. She had to know more. It was nothing, she lied, her voice tight. A difficult chord. It's frustrating sometimes. Valerius studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly, accepting the half-truth. Progress often is, he said, but the shadow of doubt remained in his eyes. That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. The twisted echo of the lullaby seemed louder, seeping up from the foundations. It was a siren song of dissolution, the melody of the gloom itself, and it was calling, not to her, but to the power sleeping inside the silent girl in the gray conservatory. She thought she was teaching music. She was learning she held a tuning fork for the apocalypse, and she was no longer sure who on this mountain was the warden and who was the prisoner. The gloom did not rest. News came daily, carried by grim-faced messengers on lathered horses or via the flickering, unreliable magic of the spire's communication crystals. A village well had turned to viscous, green sludge. A stand of ancient timber had crumbled to gray dust overnight. In the farthest valley, a shepherd reported his entire flock standing motionless for a day before simply falling apart, as if their internal cohesion had vanished. The decay was accelerating.
and with it the tension in the spire stretched wire tight. Valerius spent less time at the harp and more in the war room, a cavernous chamber dominated by a map of the kingdom carved into a great slab of obsidian. Tiny glowing pins marked the spread of the sickness. A creeping phosphorescent green was slowly swallowing the map from the edges inward. The spire was the lone dark pinnacle in a sea of encroaching illness. Ilara saw the toll it took on him. The weary slope of his shoulders, the new lines etching his ageless face. He was a king watching his realm die, and his sole strategy was a silent daughter and a human woman with a song. Lord Corvus, by contrast, seemed energized. He spoke of adaptation, of new paradigms. He presented scrolls of complex magical theory to Valerius, arguing that the gloom wasn't a poison, but a transformation, that vampire kind could learn to feed on this new, wild energy to become stronger, fiercer. He spoke of a great realignment, his eyes gleaming with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. "We are clinging to a world that is ending, sire," Corvus argued during one council session Alara observed from a balcony. "The old harmonies are broken. The celestial score is lost. We must write new music with the instruments we have. The gloom is that instrument. We can be its masters, not its victims." Valerius's voice was granite. "We are its guardians, Corvus, not its exploiters. My wife gave her life to contain this. I will not dishonor her sacrifice by unleashing it for power." "Your wife is dead." Corvus's composure cracked, revealing the raw ambition beneath. "And her containment is failing. Look at your map. You are choosing a ghost over your living people." The silence that followed was volcanic. Valerius rose, and the temperature in the room plummeted. "You overreach, Chancellor. My wife's memory and my daughter's life are not bargaining chips. We will find a cure, the old way." "With her?" Corvus spat, flinging a hand toward the balcony where Ilara stood. "A human street urchin who knows a pretty tune? You gamble a kingdom on a lullaby, Valerius. It is not kingship, it is sentimentality, and it will doom us all." He stormed out. Valerius stood alone by the bleeding map, a figure of immense, lonely power, crumbling from within. Later, Ilara found him in the conservatory, not with Lyra, but staring at the dead garden. "Is it true?" she asked quietly, no longer able to hold the question in. "What Corvus said about the gloom? About Lyra containing it?" Valerius didn't turn. "Seraphina was a keeper," he said, his voice hollow, "the last of her line. The harmony was failing in her time. Wild magic, ancient and chaotic, was seeping back into the world. When Lyra was born, she was attuned to it, a perfect conduit. It called to her, sang to her in her crib. Seraphina spent years building mental wards, teaching her control. Then, 3 years ago, there was a surge, a tidal wave of that raw power focused on our daughter. Seraphina, she didn't have the strength to deflect it, so she did the only thing she could. She wrapped Lyra in a binding of silence, using the last motif of the celestial score she remembered, the lullaby. She captured the storm inside our child and sealed the door with her own life." He finally looked at her, his eyes haunted. "The silence is the seal. The gloom is what leaks through the cracks. Corvus is right that it is failing. Every day, Lyra's subconscious fights the binding, and a little more bleeds out. Waking her, breaking the silence, it could release it all at once." He took a step toward her. "But your song, Ilara, it's not just a reminder of the binding, it's the key to the binding, a specific, living resonance. Corvus believes he can use it to shatter the seal and seize the power. I believe, I have to believe,
that in the right hands, it could be used to carefully reweave the seal, to heal Lyra and contain the magic properly, not as a prison, but as a part of her she can learn to control. The weight of it threatened to crush her. "You're bringing me here as a locksmith to fix a lock on a dam that's about to burst." "I brought you here," he said, his voice fierce with conviction, "because you are the first person in 3 years who has made my daughter feel something other than terror. You have the key, yes, but you also have the compassion to use it gently. Corvus would break the dam and try to ride the flood. I am asking you to help me rebuild the dam stronger before it breaks on its own." It was an impossible task. She was a piano teacher, not a mystic engineer. "I don't know how," she whispered. "Neither do I," he admitted, "but we have to try, and we are running out of time." He pointed out the window. A visible wave of gray was creeping up the lower slopes of their mountain. It would reach the spire's outer walls within weeks. The next day, Ilara changed her approach with Lyra. It wasn't just music therapy anymore. It was a desperate lesson in control. She explained, as simply as she could, that the music inside her, the big, scary, beautiful music, was like a wild horse. The lullaby was a bridle. They had to learn to hold the reins together. She taught Lyra to hum, not the lullaby, but a single steady note, a drone, a foundation. At first, Lyra just stared. Then a tiny, shaky hum emerged, so faint Ilara felt it more than heard it. The moment she did, the sickly green light in a potted dying fern in the corner flickered and dimmed slightly. It was working, a minuscule, monumental proof of concept. But they were being watched. Ilara felt Corvus's eyes constantly. She found one of the harp strings snapped, cleanly and deliberately. Liana, her maid, began to look more frightened, bringing meals with trembling hands, whispering that Lord Corvus is asking questions about Ilara's past, about her family. The outside world invaded in a more direct way a week later. A disturbance at the main gate, shouting. Ilara, from her window, saw a familiar, hated figure, Marcus. He looked thinner, angrier, his fine clothes travel-stained. He was arguing with the impassive vampire guards, waving a scroll, the marriage contract. He had found her. Her blood turned to ice. She watched as Valerius, summoned by the commotion, emerged onto the gatehouse battlements. Even from a distance, she could see the lethal coldness that settled over him. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw Marcus's face go from arrogant bluster to pale terror as Valerius spoke. The king made a small, cutting gesture. 2 guards seized Marcus, not roughly, but with inexorable force, and escorted him away from the gates, back down the mountain road. Valerius had promised her protection. He was delivering it. But the incident proved Corvus's point. She was a destabilizer. She brought human problems to a vampire citadel on the brink of magical collapse. That evening, a package arrived in her rooms, delivered not by Liana, but by a faceless servant. It contained her grandmother's journal, the one she thought had been lost when she fled her father's house. With it was a note, in Corvus's elegant, spidery script. "Every key has a history, Miss Ilara. Perhaps understanding yours will clarify your choices. The final movement approaches. Choose your conductor wisely." He was offering her the truth, or his version of it, trying to sway her. Fingers trembling, she opened the journal. The pages were filled not with recipes or memories, but with musical notation, complex, staggering notation that made her trained mind ache, and notations in the same ancient tongue as the lullaby. Descriptions of ley line resonances, primordial harmonics, binding cadences. Her sweet, frail grandmother had been a scholar of world-altering magic. And on the last page, a hastily scribbled warning. "The score is broken. The last refrain binds the tide, but the tide dreams of a conductor. It will call to a keeper's blood. Beware the discordant air. He seeks not to mend, but to play his own symphony upon the ruins. The discordant air. Corvus. Ilara closed the journal, her heart a drum of dread.
The journal was a ghost that took up residence in Alara's mind. Its cryptic musical equations danced behind her eyes as she worked with Lyra. The simple hum they practiced was now underpinned by a terrifying complexity. She could see the theoretical structure of the binding in her grandmother's notations, a magnificent, fraying cage of interlocking harmonic frequencies. The lullaby was the central latch. Lyra felt the shift in her. The princess's silver eyes would fix on Alara with a knowing intensity that belied her years and silence. She was sensing the deeper current in their sessions. The magic knew its custodian. Valerius, burdened by the crumbling kingdom, noticed the new gravity between them, but mistook it for deepening rapport. "She trusts you," he said one evening, watching Lyra deliberately shape a series of notes on a small, handheld flute Alara had procured. "I haven't seen her focus like this since—" He trailed off, the memory of his wife a constant, painful presence. "She's incredibly strong," Alara said, and it was no longer just encouragement, it was awe. Lyra was holding back an ocean with the force of a child's will, guided by a dead mother's love. Every day she didn't shatter was a miracle. "We need to be stronger," Valerius replied, his gaze on the map in the war room. The green stain was at the base of their mountain. The first reports of stone sleep among the lower castle staff had come in. Attendants found standing motionless, their skin gray and cold, minds empty. The gloom wasn't just killing life, it was unmaking consciousness. It was after one such report that Corvus made his move. He cornered Alara not in the conservatory, but in the high, lonely library of the spire, a place of dust and forgotten lore. He held another journal, older, its cover stained and cracked. "My research," he said, his voice devoid of its usual polished malice, replaced by a chilling academic passion. "The discordant theory. The celestial harmony was a beautiful lie, Miss Alara, an attempt to force chaos into pretty patterns. But chaos is the true nature of power. The gloom, the tide, as your grandmother called it, is not corruption. It is potential, unfiltered, unimaginable potential." He opened the journal to a diagram, a vortex of conflicting musical staves, clashing notes creating a pattern of devastating beauty. The old keepers tried to suppress this. They called it discord. But discord is simply freedom, the freedom of energy to be what it is, not what lesser beings wish it to be. Lyra isn't a prison for this power. She is its womb. And your lullaby, it is the midwife's song. It can bring this new power screaming into the world. His eyes glowed with zealous light. "Join me. Help me complete the score, not the crippled harmony my queen died for, but the true, glorious discord. With you as keeper and me as conductor, we won't just save this kingdom, we will remake the world." It was a naked offer of alliance, and it was horrifyingly seductive. He saw her not as a tool, but as a partner. He acknowledged her power, her legacy. Valerius saw her as a kind soul with a useful skill. Corvus saw her as a force of nature. "You want to use Lyra as a weapon," Alara said, her voice flat. "I want to liberate her," Corvus insisted, "to let her become what she was meant to be. Valerius would have her live as a muted ghost, forever afraid of her own shadow. I would give her the sun, the stars, the raw stuff of creation itself. You felt it, haven't you? The call? It's in your blood. It's why the lullaby came to you. You are not a repair woman for a broken past. You are the architect of a new dawn." He was right. She had felt it, a wild, thrilling pull beneath the fear when she played near Lyra, a sense of vast, singing power just beyond a thin veil, the same power that had terrified her grandmother. "And if the new dawn burns everything alive?" she asked.
Corvus shrugged, a graceful, dismissive gesture. Transformation requires fuel. Some things must ash to make way for the phoenix. It is the price of evolution. That was the line. Valerius would sacrifice himself for his people. Corvus would sacrifice the people for his vision. Alara looked at the fanatic light in his eyes and knew there was no reasoning with him. The discordant air was already lost to his own symphony. "My answer is no," she said, turning to leave. His voice stopped her, cold and sharp as an ice dagger. "A pity. Then I leave you no choice but to find another key or to remove the one I cannot turn." The threat hung in the dusty air. He wasn't just talking about killing her. He was talking about forcing the key, hurting Lyra to break the seal. Alara went straight to Valerius. She told him everything: Corvus's offer, his discordant theory, his threat. Valerius listened in granite silence, but a storm was building behind his eyes. When he finished, he spoke with deadly calm. "He has overplayed his hand. I will deal with him. You and Lyra must begin the final work. Now. Tonight." "It's too soon. We're not ready. The theory." "We are out of time, Alara," he roared, his control snapping. He gestured violently out the window. The gloom was a visible fog now, a green-gray wall creeping up the mountain, dissolving rock and air as it came. The discordant air, he knew. They would make their move. Alara must attempt the rekindling now, or we lose everything. The rekindling. Her grandmother's journal described it, a ritual using the complete celestial score to repair a harmonic binding. They didn't have the complete score. They had a lullaby, a keeper with barely awakened instincts, and a vessel on the verge of breaking. It was a suicide mission, but waiting was also suicide. Numbly, she nodded. Valerius's plan was swift. He would confront and detain Corvus, using his personal guard, men still loyal to the crown. Alara would take Lyra to the heart of the spire, the original chamber where the kingdom's ley lines converged, the place of strongest power. They would attempt the ritual there. The spire felt like a held breath as night fell. Alara fetched Lyra from her rooms. The princess came without question, her small hand slipping into Alara's, her eyes wide but clear. She knew. Somehow she always knew. They descended, not the grand staircases, but the old spiral servant stairs that wound down into the mountain's belly. The air grew colder, thicker, humming with the same oppressive energy as the gloom. The walls here were raw stone, veined with pulsing, sickly green crystal, the physical manifestation of the infection. The heart chamber was a shock. It wasn't a room of darkness, but of blinding, chaotic light. Crystals of every color jutted from floor and ceiling, but their light was tangled, warring, creating a cacophony for the eyes. In the center was a raised dais of pure, clear quartz, currently clouded with gray streaks. This was the focal point, the keystone of the kingdom, and it was cracking. They had just stepped on the dais when the chamber's main door exploded inward, not with Valerius, but with Corvus. He was disheveled, a cut on his cheek leaking black blood, but his eyes blazed with triumphant fury. Behind him were not castle guards, but figures shrouded in gray motley, vampires whose eyes glowed with the same green as the gloom. Corvus's converts, the discordant choir. "The king is detained," Corvus panted, smiling his terrible smile, trying to be noble to the end. "But this, my dear keeper, is where nobility dies." He held up his hand. In it was a shard of the same cloudy quartz from the dais, but it throbbed with a violent, discordant rhythm. The heart shard, the failsafe, the previous keeper's panic button. Shatter this on the keystone and the binding shatters. The tide is released, and I will be waiting to conduct it. Lyra whimpered, pressing against Alara. "You'll kill her," Alara said, stepping in front of the child. "I'll unmake her prison," Corvus corrected. "What emerges will be something new, something magnificent. Now, the lullaby, keeper, sing it. one last time as a requiem for the old world, or I will take the child and bleed the song from her memory myself." He gestured. Two of his gray vampires stepped forward. Alara was trapped, the dais behind her, the fanatic in front of her, the terrified child at her side, and the wild, calling power of the tide beneath her feet, vibrating up through the stone, singing a song of infinite, destructive freedom. She had no weapons, no army, only her voice, her blood, and a fragment of a lost song. She closed her eyes, feeling Lyra's small, cold hand in hers. She thought of her grandmother's warning, of Valerius's desperate hope, of the beautiful, dying world above. She wasn't a warrior, she was a musician, and it was time to play. She opened her mouth and began to sing, not the lullaby, but a single, pure, unwavering note of defiance. The note Alara sang was not from the lullaby. It was not from any song her grandmother had written down. It was a note born in the moment, forged from terror, defiance, and a sudden crystalline understanding of the journal's most cryptic diagram. It was the root tone. In the discordant theory, chaos was supreme, but in the crumbling margins of her grandmother's notes, Alara had seen a desperate, scribbled alternative. If harmony is broken and discord is dissolution, then seek the axis, the one note from which all others spiral. Find the still point in the turning world. The heart chamber, for all its blinding, clashing lights, had a center, a silent, waiting point amidst the visual scream. Her note aimed for that. It was not a beautiful sound. It was raw, human, shaking with effort, but it was true. It cut through the chaotic hum of the chamber like a knife through fog. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The violent lights in the crystal stuttered. The advancing gray vampires faltered, clutching their heads as if the sound caused them physical pain. The pulsing green veins in the stone darkened momentarily. Corvus stared, his triumphant grin freezing into a rictus of shock. "What are you doing? That's not the song." Ilara ignored him. She poured everything into the single note, holding it steady. It was the musical equivalent of planting a flag on shifting sands. Around her, the chaotic energy of the chamber didn't harmonize, it oriented. The wild magic, the tide, wasn't being tamed, it was being given a reference point, a north star in a storm of noise. Lyra's hand tightened in hers. The princess looked up, her silver eyes wide, not with fear, but with dawning comprehension. She felt it too. The chaos had a pattern, a terrible, magnificent, destructive pattern, but a pattern nonetheless. "Silence her!" Corvus shrieked, his composure shattered. He lunged forward, the heart shard raised like a dagger, aiming not for Ilara, but for the cloudy quartz dais. Ilara did the only thing she could. She broke her note and sang a sharp, commanding phrase, a three-note motif from the lullaby, the binding cadence her grandmother had described. It wasn't meant to bind the tide, it was a command for structure. The quartz dais reacted. The gray streaks within it flashed white. A visible wave of concussive force, silent but palpable, erupted from the stone. It hit Corvus and his disciples like a physical wall, throwing them back against the jagged crystal walls. The heart shard flew from Corvus's grip, skittering across the floor towards a dark fissure. But the effort cost Ilara dearly. Singing with intent, channeling the chamber's energy even slightly, was like trying to drink the ocean. She staggered, her vision swimming, a metallic taste flooding her mouth. She wasn't a trained keeper. Her body wasn't meant for this. "Ilara," Lyra's voice. It was a whisper, cracked from disuse, thin as plass. But it was a word, the first in 3 years. Ilara looked down, tears mingling with the sweat on her face. Lyra was looking at her, really looking at her, an intelligence and awareness blazing in her eyes that had been buried under grief and magic. "It's loud," the princess whispered, wincing as if the chaotic light were a sound. "So loud." She could hear the tide, not just feel it, hear it, the true discordant symphony of unbound power. Before Ilara could respond, Corvus was stirring, pushing himself up, his face a mask of fury and bleeding shadows. "You see?" he rasped, pointing a trembling finger at Lyra. "She hears it. She is meant for it. You're keeping her deaf." He scrambled towards the fallen gray heart shard. Ilara tried to summon another note, but her voice was gone, scraped raw. She was spent. A blur of motion, a figure vaulted over the fallen gray vampires, landing between Corvus and the shard. King Valerius. He was battered, his fine clothes torn, a deep gash on his arm weeping dark blood. But he stood like an unyielding cliff, his storm gray eyes blazing with a fury that made the chaotic lights seem dim. "It ends here, Corvus." "You're too late, old friend," Corvus spat, crouching like a predator. "The key is here. The lock is straining. The movement has already begun." "Then I will break the conductor's baton," Valerius said, his voice deathly quiet. They moved faster than Ilara's eyes could follow, a clash of ancient strength and desperate ambition. It was not a duel of swords, but of force. Shock waves of power slammed through the chamber, making the crystals shriek and vibrate. Valerius fought to subdue, to disarm. Corvus fought to kill, every strike aimed to maim, to create an opening to reach the shard. Lyra watched, trembling, her hands over her ears now, the chaotic symphony clearly agony for her newly awakened senses. Ilara, kneeling on the dais, felt a different pull, not to the fight, but to the key stone. The cloudy quartz beneath her hummed with a profound, deep ache. It was the ache of the land, of the dying kingdom. The gloom was its pain given form. The journal's words came back. "To heal the binding, one must heal the wound. The music is not a bandage. It is the body's own desire to be whole." She wasn't strong enough to sing, but maybe she didn't need to sing. She placed her hands flat on the cold quartz. She closed her eyes, shutting out the blinding light, the sounds of combat. She reached down, not with her voice, but with the part of her that always understood music, the part that felt the emotion behind the notes, the story and the silence between them. She reached for the root tone inside herself, the still point, and she offered it to the stone, not as a command, as a question, as an echo of what should be. "Remember," she thought murmured into the crystal. "Remember the silence before the note. Remember the harmony." A warmth bloomed under her palms. The gray streaks in the quartz began to swirl, to organize, like iron fillings around a magnet. The violent, clashing lights in the chamber began to slow, their frenetic strobing coalescing into slower, rhythmic pulses. Valerius, pinning Corvus against the wall, felt the shift. So did his enemy. "No!" Corvus screamed, thrashing with renewed frenzy. "You can't restore the prison. You'll condemn us all to slow death." "It is not a prison," Valerius growled, his grip tightening. With a final tremendous heave, Valerius hurled Corvus away from the dais, towards the chamber's edge. But as he flew, Corvus twisted, his fingers stretching, not for the heart shard, but for Lyra. "If I cannot have the dawn, then let there be only night." A whip-crack of concentrated gloom, green and hungry, lashed from his hand towards the terrified princess. Valerius moved, but he was at the wrong angle. Ilara acted on instinct. She threw herself in front of Lyra, her arms outstretched, as if she could block the magic with her body. The bolt of corrosive energy struck her square in the chest. There was no pain, not at first. There was a cold that felt like burning, a numbness that spread from her core, turning her veins to ice. She saw Lyra's horrified face, saw Valerius's roar of anguish, saw Corvus's smirk of vicious satisfaction. Then she felt it, the tide, not from the outside, from within. The gloom wasn't just attacking her, it was trying to unmeek her, to dissolve her into pure, chaotic energy, to turn the keeper into fuel for the discord. Her grandmother's blood surged in response. The latent power, the legacy of the keepers, awakened not by careful study, but by existential threat. A silvery light, the color of starlight on snow, erupted from her own skin, clashing with the invasive green. Inside her, a war raged, dissolution against identity, chaos against self. She fell to her knees, gasping, the world telescoping into the agony of the conflict inside herself. She was the battleground, and she was losing.
The world narrowed to a tunnel of cold fire and silver light. Alara was aware of shouting, of movement, but it was distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. The only realities were the invasive chill of the gloom eating at her essence and the desperate, radiant heat of her own awakening magic fighting back. Alara! Valerius's voice, cutting through the fog, raw with a fear she'd never heard in him before. He was at her side, his cool hands on her face, but his touch felt miles away. Hold on, look at me. She tried to focus on his storm-gray eyes, an anchor in the maelstrom. Behind him, she saw Lyra, her small face a mask of tear-streaked terror, held back by one of Valerius's loyal guards who had finally broken into the chamber. And she saw Corvus, struggling to his feet near the dark fissure, the heart shard now back in his grasp, his eyes fixed on her with a horrifying blend of hatred and fascination. See? Corvus crowed, his voice echoing strangely in her distorted hearing. The tide recognizes its own. It doesn't want to destroy her, it wants to consume her, to add a keeper's resonance to its symphony. She is the final ingredient. Valerius snarled, a purely animal sound, and made to lunge at him again, but Alara's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with a strength born of sheer desperation. The touch was a conduit, his ancient, cool vampire energy, the steady, grounding power of the Guardian, flowed into Alara. It didn't fight the gloom, it fortified her. It gave her fragile, newborn, silvery light a frame to hold onto. The internal war stabilized, from a rout to a desperate, trembling stalemate. The heart shard? Alara managed to gasp, each word a labor. Don't let him use it on the dais. Valerius understood instantly. Shattering the keystone with the heart shard would release the full tide. With Alara already saturated with its energy, she would likely be the first to dissolve, her keeper's essence amplifying the explosion. Take the princess to safety, Valerius commanded his guard, not taking his eyes off Corvus. Seal the chamber doors from the outside. You would trap yourself in here with us, Valerius? Corvus laughed, edging towards the dais, the heart shard held high. How noble, how futile. The guard hesitated, looking from his king to the terrified child. No! Lyra's voice was stronger now, laced with a command that echoed her father's. I'm not leaving her. She ran to Alara's other side, ignoring the guard's protest, and placed her small, cold hands over Alara's where they still pressed against the quartz. The moment Lyra touched her, everything changed. The chaotic symphony Lyra heard, the raw sounds of the tide, flooded into Alara's awareness. It was overwhelming, a billion screaming notes without rhythm or reason. But within the scream, through Lyra's unique perception, Alara could suddenly see the patterns. Not harmonious patterns,
but the twisted, fractaling, beautiful logic of pure chaos. She saw where the binding, the lullaby, squeezed too tight, causing pain and leakage, the gloom. She saw where it had frayed, allowing the wild magic to surge. And she saw, with terrifying clarity, the point of convergence. If the heart shard struck the dais, it would hit the single frayed harmonic knot that was all that held the entire structure together. It would be like snipping the one thread keeping a torn tapestry from disintegrating. Corvus raised the heart shard, his face alight with apocalyptic triumph. Alara had no voice. Her body was a battleground, but she had understanding, and she had two conduits, the steady guardian power from Valerius and the pure, unfiltered perception of the tide from Lyra. She acted not as a musician, but as a composer at the moment of creation. She stopped trying to fight the gloom inside her. Instead, she opened to it. She let the chaotic energy flood through the pathway Lyra had created, but she guided it, using Valerius's steadying power as a rudder. She didn't try to make it harmonious. She accepted its discordance, but gave it a direction. She funneled that roaring, chaotic energy into the court's dais, not to shatter it, to reinforce the frayed knot with its own wild substance. A paradox, using chaos to create stability. The chamber exploded with sound, a deafening, multitonal shriek as the wild magic violently engaged with the binding's architecture. Crystals shattered, the floor cracked. Valerius shielded Lyra with his body as debris rained down. Corvus, poised to strike, was hit by a backlash of raw energy. The heart shard in his hand grew white hot and exploded into a million glittering, harmless fragments. The blast threw him backward into the dark fissure from which he tried to retrieve it. A final, echoing scream of rage and disbelief was cut short as the fissure snapped shut with a sound like grinding continents, sealing him in the deep, dark hearts of the mountain. Silence. Dust settled. The chaotic lights were gone. The chamber was lit only by a soft, steady, silvery glow emanating from the court's dais and from Alara. She slumped forward. The internal war ceased. The gloom was gone from her body, not purged, but integrated, transformed. Her silvery light pulsed gently in time with the dais's new calm radiance. She felt impossibly heavy, yet also strangely weightless. The world came back into focus. The ruined chamber, Valerius's shocked face, Lyra's awestruck gaze. "What did you do?" Valerius breathed, helping her to sit up. His touch no longer felt distant. "I didn't heal the binding," Alara whispered, her voice hoarse but clear. She looked at Lyra. We changed the song." Lyra nodded, her eyes wide. "It's not quiet, but it's not screaming anymore. It's just singing, a new song." Valerius looked from his daughter's face to the peacefully pulsing dais. He extended his senses, his connection to the kingdom as its guardian. The violent, sickening pull of the spreading gloom was gone. Not gone as in vanished, but gone as in transformed. The wild magic was still there, but it was no longer corrosive, no longer hungry. It was neutralized, flowing in a new, stable pattern through the land's ley lines, its chaotic potential grounded by the reforged keystone. The dam hadn't been repaired. It had been rebuilt as a spillway, allowing the pressure to release safely, harmlessly. He looked at Alara, truly looked at her, the human woman in the torn clothes, glowing with a soft internal starlight, her grandmother's journal's wisdom alive in her eyes. She had not just saved his daughter, she had saved his kingdom, not by wielding a power she was given, but by becoming the bridge between two impossible forces. "The keeper," he said, the word of vow of recognition. Alara managed a weak smile. "The music teacher," she corrected softly, "who finally learned to listen." Outside, in the valleys below the spire, the creeping gray-green gloom flickered, not with sickly light, but with a shimmer of auroral colors, silver, blue, soft gold, before dissolving into the earth. The blighted grass didn't spring back to life instantly, but the deathly gray receded, leaving behind fertile, if barren, soil. The stone-sleeping attendants in the lower halls drew a sudden, gasping breath as one, their minds returning, confused but whole. The crisis was over, but the world had been fundamentally altered, and at the center of the change, in the heart of the wounded mountain, three people, a king, a princess, and a keeper, sat amidst the ruins, bound together by a song that had been rewritten and a future that was now terrifyingly, beautifully unknown.
The weeks that followed were a study in fragile convalescence for the kingdom, for the spire, and for Alara herself. The silvery glow that had erupted from her during the climax in the heart chamber did not fade. It settled into a subtle luminescence that clung to her skin, visible in dim light, a permanent testament to what she had absorbed and transformed. She was no longer just human. She was something in between, a keeper, with the wild magic of the tide, now a calm, humming river within her, harmonized by her own essence and anchored by her bond to the reforged keystone. She was also exhausted in a way sleep could not touch. Using that much power, acting as a cosmic tuning fork, had scoured her soul. She spent days in her rooms, too weary to rise, tended to by a fiercely loyal Leanna, and visited constantly by a worried Lyra. The princess, freed from the crushing silence and the terrifying pressure of the unbound tide, was a revelation. Her voice, once lost, now emerged in fits and starts, sometimes quiet and thoughtful, sometimes bursting with the pent-up observations of 3 years. She followed Alara like a shadow, not out of fear, but out of a profound, grateful kinship. She called her Alara, but the tone held the weight of savior and sister. Valerius was everywhere and nowhere. He was a king rebuilding. Corvus's faction had to be rooted out, a task he undertook with grim efficiency, but surprising mercy. Imprisonment and mind-wiping replaced execution, a nod to the new, less violent harmony he hoped to foster. He oversaw the distribution of aid to the blighted valleys, sending teams with seeds and supplies to regrow what was lost. But every evening, like clockwork, he came to her sitting room. He didn't speak much at first. He would simply sit in the chair by the fire, a silent, solid presence, as if making sure she was still real, still there. The gratitude in his stormy eyes was a language of its own, too vast for words. One such evening, as the first snow dusted the mountain peaks visible from her window, he finally broke their comfortable silence. "The reports are miraculous," he said, his voice low. "The land is not healing to what it was. It is becoming something else. New plants are sprouting in the valleys, ones we have no record of, silver-leafed, glowing softly at night. The magic, it's in the soil now, not as a sickness, but as a nutrient." Alara watched the snow fall. "A new song needs new instruments." "You are the composer," he said, and it wasn't flattery, it was fact. She shook her head, the movement still tiring. "I just played the first note. The world is composing the rest. I can feel it, a low hum. It's not the lullaby, it's not the discord, it's something evolving." "As are we," Valerius said quietly. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Alara, what you did, what you are, it changes everything. The old laws, the treaties with other courts, even the nature of my rule. You are a keeper, a power in your own right. You cannot simply be a guest or a consultant. The spire is your home, as long as you wish it. But your position, We must define it, for your safety and for the stability of this new world we are in." She knew what he was asking. He was offering her a permanent, formal place, a title, a role. It was the safety he had promised, magnified 1,000-fold. But it was also a cage of a different kind, a gilded cage of responsibility and expectation. "I don't want to be a princess," she said bluntly. A faint smile touched his lips. "I would not insult you by offering such a hollow thing. I was thinking of something older, the title my wife held in the days when keepers served alongside guardians, harmonist, advisor to the throne on matters of the magical balance, a partner in stewardship." He met her gaze. Not a subject, a counterpart. It was a staggering offer, equality, a share of the burden he had carried alone for so long. It acknowledged her power without seeking to control it, her value without seeking to own it. "I need to be able to leave, if I want to see the world, to find others, like my grandmother. There must be more." "Of course," he said, without hesitation. "Your autonomy is not part of the bargain. It is the foundation of it. You would have the resources of the court at your disposal, not its chains." She believed him. This was not Marcus's valuable possessive. This was Valerius's respectful essential. "And Lyra?" she asked. "Lyra adores you. She will need you, not as a keeper of her silence, but as a guide to her new perception. She hears the magic of the world as a constant song. It is beautiful to her, but overwhelming. You are the only one who understands." His voice softened. "She needs a teacher, and I believe I need your counsel." The word need from this ancient, powerful king did something to her. It wasn't a demand. It was an admission of vulnerability, of trust. He was offering her a family, not by blood, but by chosen bond, a place, a purpose, and people who saw her for what she truly was. She looked out at the snow, at the spire that was no longer a prison of silence, but a bastion of a strange new hope. She thought of her grandmother's journal, of the legacy she had almost lost. She could be its custodian. She could help shape what came next. "I'll stay," she said, turning back to him, "as harmonist, and as Lyra's teacher, and as your friend." The last part was the most vulnerable offer of all. Valerius's smile was like the sun breaking through the mountain clouds. He didn't reach for her hand. He simply nodded, a world of understanding and relief in the gesture. "Then welcome home, Ilara, truly." The official ceremony was small, held in the now repaired heart chamber, which glowed with a serene, combined silver and blue light. Valerius placed a circlet on her head, not gold or jewels, but woven moonstone and live, silver-veined willow grown in the newly magical valleys. It was a crown of living harmony. Lyra, standing proudly beside her, held her hand throughout. The court, those who remained loyal, watched with a mixture of awe and wary acceptance. Their world had changed. A human, glowing with internal starlight, was now the second most powerful being in the kingdom. But after the terror of the gloom, the new, gentle pulse of magic in the air felt like a blessing. They bowed, not just to their king, but to their harmonist. That night, Ilara stood on her balcony. The gloom was gone. The valleys below sparkled with patches of soft bioluminescent flora. The air was crisp, clean, and hummed with a melody only she and Lyra could fully hear, a complex, ever-changing song of renewal. It was beautiful. It was alive. She was no longer a runaway bride. She was no longer a key or a tool. She was Ilara, the harmonist of the North Reach, the woman who had sung a single note and changed the song of the world. And for the first time in her life, she was not afraid of the future's melody. She was eager to listen to what came next. The new harmony was not a perfect chord. It was a work in progress, a symphony with occasional wrong notes and surprising cadences. Alara's wife, as harmonist, settled into a rhythm far more complex than any she had known. Mornings were for Lyra. The princess's education was unlike any other. They didn't use books of history or sums. They walked the rejuvenating valleys, and Lyra would point to a shimmering sapphire blue fungus and describe its song, a high, tinkling arpeggio. Lyra would listen with her own deepened senses, learning to interpret the magical soundscape. She taught Lyra to not just hear the magic, but to gently influence it, to encourage a wilting plant with a hum, to calm an agitated geyser of earth energy with a focused thought. Lyra was a prodigy, her connection innate and powerful, but it was Alara who gave her the vocabulary, the discipline, the ethics of a keeper. Afternoons were for court. Alara sat at Valerius's right hand, a silent observer at first, then a quiet voice of insight. When a noble from a southern district complained of uncanny lights frightening livestock, Alara suggested it was merely a cluster of the new spirit wisp plants, singing too brightly. She suggested transplanting them, not destroying them. When a debate arose about mining a newly revealed vein of singing crystal, Alara felt its song was one of fragile growth. She advised waiting, letting it strengthen. Her counsel, backed by her unique perception, carried immense weight. Valerius listened, his decisions often aligning with her felt sense of the kingdom's magical equilibrium. Evenings. Evenings were often for silence, sometimes with Valerius in the library, reading ancient texts on pre-Discord magic, trying to understand their new reality, sometimes alone on her balcony, listening to the land's ever-evolving song, feeling her own internal magic hum in sympathetic resonance. It was during one of these quiet library sessions that the past tapped on the present's shoulder. Liana entered, looking uneasy. Harmonist, there is a visitor at the lower gate, a human woman. She asks for sanctuary. She says her grandmother sang a song about moonlight and memory. Alara's heart stuttered. She exchanged a glance with Valerius, who set his book down. Another one, he asked, his brow furrowed. Since the Great Change, a trickle of humans with faint magical sensitivity, descendants of other lost keeper lines, had been drawn to the spire, sensing a shift in the world's frequency. Alara had established a small sanctuary for them, a place to learn and be safe. This one is different, Liana said. She is with child, and she is terrified. She says a man, a lord from the lowlands, claims the child is his property, as she was his servant. He is coming for her. Ilara's were on her feet before she knew it. The story was a mirror, cracked and distorted, of her own. A woman running from ownership, carrying a song in her blood. Bring her to the Rose Court. Gently, I'll be there. Valerius did as well. Do you need me? She saw the concern in his eyes, the instinct to protect. But this was her domain now, the domain of the lost, the magical, the hunted. I'll handle it, she said, touching his arm briefly, but have the guards at the gate be visibly vigilant. The woman in the Rose Court was named Anya. She was young, barely more than a girl, her eyes huge in a pale, pinched face. Her hands were clasped protectively over a slight swell in her abdomen. When Alara entered, glowing softly in the twilight of the courtyard, Anya fell to her knees. Please, she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. He'll take my baby. He says it's his because I'm his. I heard there was a place here, a place where the old songs are remembered. Alara knelt, ignoring the damp stone, and took Anya's cold hands. You are safe here, she said. No one takes what is not given. What song did your grandmother sing? Anya hummed a few bars. It was a different melody, a cousin to Alara's lullaby, in a warmer, earthier key, a song of roots and resilience, another fragment of the lost celestial score. You are welcome here, Anya, Alara said, her voice firm with the authority of her title. You and your child. This is your home now, for as long as you wish. We will teach you about your song.
As she helped Anya to her feet, a commotion echoed from the main gate. Angry shouts, a familiar, oily voice raised in demand. Alara's blood ran cold, not with fear, but with a slow, burning anger. She walked to the gatehouse, Anya clinging to her arm. Below, on the winding road, was a man in rich traveling clothes, flanked by a dozen armed mercenaries. He was shouting up at the impassive vampire guards. I demand you return my property. That woman carries my heir. This is an outrage. Alara stepped into view on the battlement. The evening light caught her moonstone circlet and made her skin gleam. She didn't say anything, just looked down. The man's tirade died in his throat. He stared, his mouth agape, at the glowing woman who was clearly more than human. What are you? I am the harmonist, she said, her voice carrying on the still mountain air without effort, amplified by the magic within her. This mountain and all who seek sanctuary upon it are under my protection, and the king's. Your claim is null here. Turn around, leave. If you set foot on this path again with violence in your heart, you will not like the song the mountain sings for you. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply stated fact. And in her eyes a hint of silvery light pulsed, a glimpse of the vast, tuned power she now wielded. The man paled. His mercenaries shuffled nervously, feeling the unnatural stillness of the air, the watchful presence of the vampires, who seemed more like extensions of the dark stone itself. With a final sputtered curse, the man turned his horse and fled, his men scrambling after him. Anya sagged against Ilara, sobbing with relief. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Ilara held her, watching the retreating figures. She had run from a man like that once. Now she had faced one down without a tremor. She had not just found a sanctuary, she had become one. Later, she told Valerius what had happened. He listened, a proud, fierce light in his eyes. The harmonists, indeed, he murmured. You didn't just protect a woman, you defined the law of this new age. Sanctuary is not just granted, it is enforced. It's what you offered me, she said simply. No, he corrected gently. I offered you escape. You have built a kingdom where escape is no longer necessary. That night, the land's song felt sweeter, stronger. A new, brave little melody had been added. Anya's lullaby, a song of survival, now woven safely into the spire's growing chorus. The symphony was unfinished, but with each new voice, each act of protection, each choice for harmony over domination, Ilara felt them composing a better world, one note, one life at a time.
Years are but breaths to a vampire king, and to a keeper touched by eternal magic, they begin to feel like verses in a long, beautiful poem. 5 years after the silencing of the discord, the northern reach was unrecognizable from the blighted, dying kingdom it had been. The spire was no longer a stark monolith of shadow. Vines of glowing silver star creepers scaled its bases. Gardens of luminous flowers now bloomed in its courtyards, their scents changing with the magical tides. The valleys below were a tapestry of impossible colors. Fields of grain that chimed softly in the wind, forests where the trees hummed in harmony, rivers that ran with water and clear as crystal and sang as they flowed. Alara's sanctuary for the magically inclined, dubbed the Haven, had grown into a small, thriving township at the mountain's foot. Humans and the occasional vampire with latent keeper blood lived there, studying the new magic, learning to listen to the world's song, and contributing their unique melodies to the realm. Anya's daughter, now a bright-eyed child of 5, was one of its most promising young students, her laugh like the peal of a crystal bell. Lyra, at 15, was a force of nature. No longer a silent vessel, she was a brilliant, sometimes tempestuous young woman with her mother's compassion and her father's steel. Her connection to the magical spectrum was profound. She could converse with the spirit wisps, calm earth tremors with a song, and her harp playing could make the northern lights dance. She was the living bridge between her father's ancient, enduring rule and Alara's new, magical harmony. Her official title was Princess Heir, but everyone knew she was being groomed as the next harmonist, a role she embraced with fierce dedication. Valerius ruled with a quieter, wiser strength. The constant fear for his daughter and his kingdom had lifted, replaced by a deep, abiding pride and a cautious hope for the future. He and Alara had settled into a partnership that was the envy of other courts. They were not king and subject, nor were they lovers in the traditional human sense. Their bond was deeper, woven from shared catastrophe, mutual respect, and a love for their daughter and their realm that transcended simple definition. They were two pillars holding up the same sky, different in composition, but united in purpose. One autumn evening, with the air sharp and the magical auroras painting the sky in silent, sweeping chords, they stood together on the highest balcony of the spire, watching Lyra below in the haven's central square. The princess was leading a chorus of children, human and vampire, in a simple, strengthening chant for the coming winter. Their combined voices rose, a pure, powerful thread in the land's great symphony. "She's remarkable," Valerius said, his voice thick with emotion. "She had remarkable teachers," Alara replied, smiling softly. "A king who never gave up, and a world that refused to die." He looked at her, the aurora light reflecting in his stormy eyes. "And a harmonist who taught us all to sing a new song." He was silent for a moment. "Do you ever miss it? The silence? The simplicity of before?" Alara thought of her tiny apartment, her piano students, the life that had felt like a cage. She thought of the terrifying, glorious moment in the heart chamber, the cold of the gloom, the heat of awakening power. "No," she said honestly. "I miss the idea of a simple life sometimes, but I never had one. I was always waiting for this complexity, this purpose, this family." The word family hung between them, acknowledged and cherished. "The other courts are talking," Valerius said, shifting to matters of state, but his tone was relaxed. "They call us the Kingdom of Song. They are wary, intrigued. Some are even envious. They feel the shift in the world's magic, and they see our stability." "Let them talk," Elara said, her harmonious confidence evident. "Let them come and see. We are not a threat. We are an alternative. Harmony does not mean weakness. A well-tuned instrument can create music more powerful than any blast of noise." He chuckled, a rich, warm sound. "Spoken like a true keeper, and my wisest advisor." He grew serious again. "There will always be discordant heirs, Ilara, men like Corvus and the one who chased Anya. Power attracts those who wish to dominate, not harmonize." "I know," she said, her silvery glow pulsing gently. "And we will be here, a sanctuary, a counter melody, a place where the lost songs are remembered, and new ones are born in safety." She looked at Lyra, at the singing children, at the glowing, vibrant land. "This is the eternal refrain, Valerius, not a final, closed chord, but a recurring theme of protection, of growth, of chosen family. It will echo as long as we tend it." He placed his hand over hers on the balustrade. His touch was cool, steadying, familiar. "Then we shall tend it, together, for all our days." Below, Lyra finished the chant. The children cheered. The magical aurora overhead swirled in a final, dazzling crescendo as if in applause. The song of the northern reach, a symphony of stone and starlight, of ancient vows and newborn magic, of a runaway bride who became a harmonist, and the king who learned to hope again, played on, strong, beautiful, and forever unfinished, ready for the next verse, the next voice, the next note in their eternal shared song.